depression and can't remember why life is worth living, I can watch that and you know, be reminded. That was amazing. Thank you. I'm humbled by that. I'm humbled also and touched by how many people are here. Thank you all for coming tonight. I know there's a lot of other things competing for your attention here in South Bend, but I appreciate that you made it. I appreciate that you, I appreciate that you made it out here tonight. So I thought I should make some, so I'm going to make some remarks at the beginning. I feel as though I should offer something of a content advisory or a trigger warning. War porn has been called brutal, unsettling, disturbing, fierce, searing, and uncompromising, among other epithets, in no small part because the book ends with a scene in which the military violence of the Iraq War is carried over into sexual violence against a young American woman. Part of the point of that, of course, is that the military violence of the Iraq War was always sexual. It was sexual to begin with, in a variety of ways, of which the tortured Abu Ghraib, which is sort of invoked in the book, was only the most egregious. Part of the point, too, was to communicate something about the truth of the Iraq War to American audiences, 72% of which supported the invasion of Iraq, according to Gallup polls conducted in March of 2003. The point is that here was a war in which the U.S. invaded a sovereign country on a pretext of lies, a war in which we don't even know how many Iraqis were killed, fighters and civilians, men, women, children, because we cared too little to keep track. The numbers are a matter of dispute, somewhere between 100,000 and 1 million Iraqi dead between 2003 and 2011 as a result of the war on occupation. That's not even talking about what's happened since 2011, which is a whole other kettle of fish. So the question I faced as a novelist writing war porn, started writing in 2005, was how to communicate to American audiences the kind of violence and suffering that we unleashed on those people, and other things. The war's not just, the book isn't just about suffering, but that's an important part of it. How to bring that home. I could tell a story about an Iraqi, and I do. I tell the story of Qasim al-Zabadi, an Iraqi mathematician caught in Baghdad during the invasion, how he comes to work as an interpreter for the occupation, and how he's later accused of spying on the Americans, imprisoned and tortured. I could tell the story of an American soldier, how he's dehumanized and brutalized by the war, how he grows callous to the racialized violence that makes up his day-to-day job, and I do. I tell that story through Wilson, an American Humvee driver, an aimless young man who joins the Army as a way out of the service economy rut he finds himself stuck in. But still, I had to bring the war home. And that's where Dahlia comes in. She's a young anthropologist turned barista, unhappy to find herself stuck in her own dead end in Moab, Utah, who sees in a just-returned veteran her chance for liberation. Unfortunately for her, she's mistaken violence for freedom. The thing about stories, about fiction, is that they're not just mimetic or empirical. They're not science. Right? Stories operate in a realm, I think, closer to myth. To cite Frederick Jameson, glossing Claude Lévi-Strauss, they offer imaginary solutions to real social contradictions. One of the key ways that myths resolve social contradictions is through scapegoating. Through narratives from the Gospel of Christ to Oklahoma to the story of traumatized veterans, we come together as a community over the ritualized suffering or death of a representative individual, who then bears the burdens of our sins for us. In writing war porn, I could see, though I hadn't articulated these ideas in this way at that time, that neither Qasim's sacrifice nor Wilson's would trouble the American conscience much. Both stories are well-established narratives through which we affirm our collective identity. Think of American Sniper. Dead Iraqis and traumatized soldiers are the acceptable, recognized costs of American freedom. What I had to make real for readers was the fact that the costs of war are borne not only by the soldiers who fight and the civilians who get caught in the crossfire, they're also borne by the people who legitimate the war fought in their name. war changes people, and not just the people who fight it. This is a truth we don't like to think about, that the American military violence going on right now overseas has an effect on the American soul, so busy with its work and its shopping and its Facebook. But it's a truth we need to face, because if we don't, it will come back to us in unforeseen ways. There's a line from the invasion of Iraq to the resurgent white nationalism that's found its figurehead in Donald Trump. There's a connection between the sexual politics of Abu Ghraib and the toxic masculinity of the alt-right. Some of what people see as fierce in war porn is no doubt the way that I make this explicit. Not only the violence of the novel's end, but in the misogyny, racism, and casual cruelty of the army culture I portray. That part, the dialogue and actions of American soldiers, is empirical, and that it's drawn largely from my own experience. In describing this world in war porn, my hope is not to glorify, aestheticize, or justify it, but to bring it into critical relation with the other worlds of the novel, including the world from which Wilson came, the world of peacetime America, and the world into which Wilson found himself thrown, the world of occupied Baghdad. Which brings me to my second point. Many people seem to think today that the purpose of art is personal expression. The artist expresses his or her inner soul, and the audience consumes it. The truth of art in this logic lies in the total subjectivity of the artist's position, their identity, the oneness of their identity with their creation, the oneness of their identity with the identity that society wants them to perform. According to this logic, it's inappropriate for artists to move beyond the identity they inhabit, both because it distances them from what is perceived to be the source of their art, and because it risks trampling on or appropriating the identity of others. This is, to my view, a narrow, very recent, and very consumerist notion of art, one that deforms both artists and audiences, and deforms the very notion of art as a way of being human. Because while personal expression is undoubtedly part of the artistic process and practice, the slightest familiarity with artistic practice outside of contemporary consumer capitalism forces one to come to terms with the fact that personal expression is only one part of it, not even the most important, indeed often the least. As a kind of human activity throughout history and across the world, art serves innumerable functions, including entertaining, beautifying, storing information, sanctifying certain ideas or narratives, inspiring political action, prompting reflection or meditation or prayer, signifying class or caste or tribe, training, communicating facts about the world, and the mythic functions that I mentioned earlier. Among the many things art does, there are two that seem to me most important, and that I tried to do with war porn. The first is that art is a way of understanding the world. It's a way of engaging with the complexity of our universe, from the differences and similarities between different human cultures, to the vastness of space, from our intimate connections to the microbial world that is part of us, to the dazzling abstractions of science and mathematics. From the drama of the human heart in conflict with itself, to the tragedy of humans in conflict with each other. Art offers a unique, spirited, felt way of understanding. I believe the novel in particular has a special capacity in that it can embody and put into coherent tension not only multiple voices and perspectives, but multiple consciousnesses, multiple discourses, multiple worlds. This kind of polyphony, what Bakhtin called heteroglossia, makes the novel a uniquely powerful vehicle for historical and social understanding. Achieving this demands, of course, that the novelist be willing to risk ranging outside their own experience. It also demands curiosity, empathetic imagination, research, and respect. The second function of art that I think is most important today is that it enlarges human potential. To produce art is not only to reflect the world, but to add to it, to produce new reality, which production increases human possibility. Art creates new concepts, new metaphors, new ways of being human. This, for me, is art's greatest and most important power, not least because we live in a time of danger in which humanity is threatened as never before in its existence, not even during the darkest moments of the Cold War. Anthropogenic climate change will almost certainly destroy global civilization as we know it, and may eventually wipe out human life on Earth. This is our future. I believe art has a special role to play in helping us adapt to this radically changing world. But that's another story. One that I tell in my other book, Learning to Die in Anthropocene. For now, war porn. What I'm going to read, I'm going to read 3 different sections. One from the Qasim section, one so from an Iraqi point of view. Qasim is only featured sort of peripherally, and it actually deals mostly with other Iraqi characters. One section, one of the connective sections of the book, these Babylon sections that you heard, actually the very section that Val quoted in her introduction. So you can compare our readings. I'm sure she'll leave me in the dust. And then finally, one of the Wilson sections from The American Soldier. Day and night, bombs crashed into Baghdad. You watched it on TV, you heard it on the radio, you saw it from the roof, and when you ventured out into the street. Soldiers and civilians, arms and legs roasting, broken by falling stone, intestines spilling onto concrete, homes and barracks, walls ripped open. Baathists and Islamists, communists and social democrats, grocers, tailors, construction workers, nurses, teachers, all scurrying to hide in dim burrows where they would wait to die, as many died. Some slowly from disease and infection, others quick in bursts of light. Thickets of tumbling steel, halos of dust, crushed by the world's greatest army. As the bombing grew worse, the terror of it stained every living moment. Sleep was a fractured nightmare of the day before, cut short by another raid. Stillness and quiet didn't mean peace, only more hours of anxious waiting, or death. Even the comfort of family rubbed raw. Maha sat in her room listening to Britney Spears and Brandy, wishing she was anywhere else. This war was going to ruin her life, she knew it. It was going to ruin her chances for marriage, it was going to ruin everything. Her skin was breaking out, her hair frizzing and splitting. She stood at her window and gazed through the slit between the 2 pieces of plywood nailed over the glass and watched smoke drift over her city, and the smoke was her future fading to haze. She started hitting Nazaha hard. She hated how her sister kept praying, stupid God, like it would do anything. She hated her mother and father, her sick cousin Qasim, whom she had to keep nursing, creepy old Othman, her sisters. She hated her mother's patience and stillness. She hated Warda's incessant singing and Khalida's watchful eyes. They were all conspiring against her. None of them understood how terrible it was to have her life ruined at 17, before she was married, before she even fallen in love. She stood at her window and gazed through the slit between the 2 pieces of wood and watched flames burn along the skyline, half hoping she'd see it all devoured. More bombs fell on the city. Day and night, smoke clouded the sky and the sun blazed like blood. Sometimes air raid sirens would break the heavens with wailing, and all across the city people would drop what they were doing and hide. Then the sirens would subside and no bombs would fall. Then the all clear would sound, or not, while anti-aircraft guns hacked at the empty grave. What people grew to depend on was the mosque. After every bombing, out from the many minarets across the city, the muezzin would sound, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah. And more bombs fell on the city. Warda kept herself busy. She could not bear to be still. As soon as she stopped moving, her mind bloomed with grim thoughts of her husband and her boys. She could not bear to think of her little Siraj, lifeless and torn, or Abdul Majid, who cried and fussed so much, falling quiet forever. There was an emptiness the depths of which Warda refused to peer into. To lose her beloved Ratib, whose skin she adored, whose hips and back and shoulders she clung to, whose lips and cheeks and eyebrows she loved so dearly they made her ache, after all their struggles, would be losing the world. So she mended, she cleaned, she baked. She'd watch movies sometimes with the family, a little, but her mind wandered, and after a few minutes she'd get up and find something else to do. She reorganized the kitchen and the closets. She dusted behind the TV. And she sang, quietly, songs from her childhood, and a soft and lilting voice that sounded through the house, soothing the family. They couldn't see the horror behind her gentle eyes, couldn't hear how her songs were only noise, the hush and endless silence, so they were calmed by them, and this, in turn, helped calm Warden. So she kept singing. And sometimes, as she sang, she could even imagine a future. She might go back to work for the Ministry of Trade, where she'd worked before Abdul-Majid had been born. She might hope. She might grow old with Ratib, watch her sons become men, watch them go to college, have careers and lives of their own. She might live to see her grandchildren born. And more bombs fell on the city. Bread prices doubled, tripled, quadrupled. There was no propane. There was no benzene. The satellite went in and out, and eventually Iraq TV shut down, but the radio still played patriotic songs and reports of the Americans' defeat. When they could, they watched CNN or Al Jazeera. They watched balls of fire rise up in the night across the Dijla, red and gold flowers blooming in the black water. They saw their city in green from above, and videos made by the men who were killing them. Bright neon stripes cutting the screen, pale green explosions below. They watched TV reporters in Kuwait, Qatar, and Israel put on gas masks. They watched American tanks push across the desert. They watched Iraqi soldiers surrender. They watched Iraqi soldiers die. They watched their brothers and husbands and sons forced to their knees and thrown like trash into the backs of trucks, blindfolded and hog-tied. On Al Jazeera, they saw children in rubble, ruptured bodies leaking like cracked pomegranates. On CNN, they saw generals pointing at big maps full of arrows. Allahu Akbar, cried the muezzin, La ilaha illallah. And more bombs fell. Nazaha prayed. She bore the abuse of her sister, the discomforts when there was no light, no electricity, no water. She bore the tremor of fear. She bore it all, praying constantly to God and the Prophet, to Khadijah, the Prophet's wife, to Fatima, the Prophet's daughter, and to Michael Jackson. God was testing them, just as he tested the Prophet, and she would show him her heart's recitation. So devout in her prayer was she that her absent-mindedness grew worse than ever. She let the kettle boil over. She burned bread. She forgot to give Qasim his antibiotic. She swept up the kitchen and left a small, tidy pile of dirt in the middle of the floor. Her mother chided her. Khalida snapped at her. Maha hit her. And Nazaha prayed for forgiveness and mercy. She prayed to be less absent-minded. She prayed for God to make her eyebrows less bushy. She prayed for God to keep them all safe. It was hard, with all the fear in the house, to feel the nearness of God. More and more, she spent her time alone, writing out prayers on slips of paper, reading the Quran and books on the Sirah and the Hadith, and a book from the 70s about pan-Islamism. She drew secret pictures of the Prophet and Michael Jackson riding together on Buraq, the white-winged, woman-faced horse that carried the Prophet on Isra and Miraj. She pictured the Prophet and Michael Jackson walking together in the desert, holding hands, Fatima looking suspiciously like Nazaha herself, walking behind them. She imagined they spoke together of the jagged beauty of palm trees and the buzz of bees, the way honey dripped clear and gold on flatbread, her father's smell when he'd been smoking, and of how the purity of God's mercy would conquer all. How great God was to have given us such a world with red tomatoes and green reeds and the great brown Dijla, the wonder of the muezzin's call and the glory of Thriller, the perfection of breakfast at breakfast time, tea at tea time, and bed at bedtime. Nazaha prayed in ecstasies of gratitude that she was alive and that God had made the world and that the world was so perfect and full. And more bombs fell. The lights went out. The electricity went out. The water stopped running. It came back on. It shut off again. They began to leave candles everywhere and matches. They went to bed just after sundown, even though they knew they wouldn't sleep through the night, and arose at dawn, lethargic and anxious for the night's thundering bombardments. There was nothing else to do with the power off and on but lie in their misery and fear. Allahu Akbar, cried the muezzin, La ilaha illallah. Day and night, bombs, rockets, and missiles crashed down into Baghdad, erupting in plumes of smoke, strewing metal and the screaming wounded. And they watched CNN, Al Jazeera, and the BBC, and they saw their city burning. They watched their husbands, sons, and brothers shot, captured, shamed, dishonored. They watched Qasr fall. They watched Basra fall. They watched Al-Nasiriyah fall. They watched Karbala fall. They huddled around a map, listening to the rumors on the news, trying to see how far the Americans had come. Nothing is over. This is the story of a long-haired, half-crazed Vietnam vet harassed by small-town lawmen, lost on his one-man mission of vengeance. Back in the war, he was part of a ragtag team of misfit soldiers, hand-picked for a suicide mission to kill Hitler. Good and evil. He's a downed fighter pilot. He's red and white and blue. This is the story of the sword, gun, dawn, patrols, blacktop, sick, guided in a bad 100 feet, drowned, gulf, military units added to the brass shell docks devour battle. So they too were made of vanity, and 72 hours not from the stories of previous wars. Violence inflicted on the largest burden themselves, some of which depicted pyramids and the rest shocked of no man's land. Lee Marvin leads a ragtag gang of misfits through the hell of war and loss of innocence as they fight for freedom in America from the deserts of North Africa to the forests of Germany. He's an idealistic young officer, leading his all-black regiment on a suicide attack on a coastal fortress. No man. Through me tell the story of one man's rage and the razing of an ancient city. He's an idealistic young officer charged with cowardice for refusing to send his men to their death on a suicide attack. New reports, electricity, widening the circle of direct blame for shooting it up my ass. On first setting eyes, alas, my son harassed by small-town artillery emplacements, a bridge no more. Night and day did I glory in misfits hand-picked and leads a ragtag bunch of strength to all enjoyable men in hell from the glory. A young man discovers commando war nothing, for no one pilot develops a tenuous ragtag bunch of all-American right hand like a lizard, but that's not hell. A bunch of ragtag boots lying like getting my machine impression of his wife to flow. I mean, when I voted for hell, horses in administrative succession, running the Achaeans, divide the fate, detainee sevens allegations, the tale of courage and honor, loyalty, grace under pressure, and a will to win. He's a young, dedicated soldier sent up the river to kill a rogue agent. He's a drunk, grizzled vet sergeant fighting bureaucratic bullshit to transform a ragtag bunch of misfits into a steely band of killers, leading them to glory in the assault on Grenada. The allegations of this man alone, unsupported, allegations of abuse, his statements available, Peleus, for he is mightier than you. Nevertheless, intel interests dogs and vultures, and a load of grief would be lifted from my damage. Iraq's eyewitness reports life. Both Iraqis cry. The British Academy has committed Muslims, like people attacking a library. Ragtag, a young glory. An Army Special Forces operative goes up the river. A young man joins the Marines and becomes a photographer and is sent to Vietnam and learns that war is hell, is hell. War story. A retired Special Forces operative returns to Vietnam to rescue his POW buddies. This is the story of the center in Washington, D.C., where he practiced for conventions of war. Rules had no way to confirm they were the war and their equipment in civilian areas, maintaining Abu Ghraib largely with Iraqis and no intelligence.